They're awful at the moment because the reason why is because Hollywood makes these movies and they're no longer you get soundtrack to complement your film, you get soundtrack to sell somebody's record. Right, what do you think about that?
Well, I agree with it.
Yeah.
I think it's a shame that music isn't designed for the film. It seems to me the other way around, that films are used as marketing tools for major record labels.
Well, we sold at least 10 cut-ins albums off the back of that.
What was it, Andy? What was it about Williams' music that you thought would kind of suit this film, Liberia? Because you were out in Liberia filming it for a few months.
William first introduced me to that whole story. What's that book? Tomorrow Your Children Will Be. The one that was about Rwanda.
That's right. Yeah,
William was always really obsessed about African conflict in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And when we ended up going to Liberia to do this film, which is we'll screen it after this talk or Q&A, whatever this is, we met a guy called General But Naked, who was like a nudist cannibal who had an army of child soldiers who used to rub brown in their head, which is heroin and gunpowder, used to put it in their head, slaughter, mass slaughter, awful disaster and apocalypse everywhere. But it was you who introduced me to that such stories.
I think it was originally via that, or at least at that time, that article on Sierra Leone that in Bazaar magazine.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, I worked for them once. It was a terrible time. You did that, and then we eventually met General But Naked, which was mentioned in that thing.
That's right.
So I thought that when I was in that situation, in that terrible place, I was actually thinking, what music, whose music would sound the best for this? And naturally, I thought of you.
I mean, it's kind of you to say that. I mean, at the time, of course, I was using lots of, I acquired this collection of Central West African instruments, and was, even with Whitehouse, was using it to make music. And I always hesitate to. It's not African music, of course. That would be way too presumptuous. It's my music using these instruments and heavily inspired by musics from that region, also from Haiti, the sort of voodoo ritual music and so forth.
I like the sound of it because it sounds just so wild. I guess a lot of the groups maybe at this place are trying to sound wild these days. Well, not wild these days, but wild. That's what attracted me to that. I don't want to be Andy Kershaw or something like that. But that kind of music, when you dig into like the real hard stuff of it, the African stuff, that label Mississippi Records put out a couple of good comps recently, which was full of all that West African gospel. But some of that sounds like Whitehouse, even how intense it sounds.
Well, intense is the word I like, actually, because I mean, typically at the beginning when I first started making music, I sort of banded this term extreme around. But extreme doesn't really mean anything in itself. It's a bit like the word very. What does very mean? Not very much. Extreme is used in a sense, but extreme what? Is it, that any type of music can be extreme in all sorts of different ways. But I prefer this term intense, and intense is something I learned from, as I say, the music from Haiti that I learned about, where they had no access to technology in terms of electronic equipment like that we're so addicted to, in the West, if we can call it that. And, with just a few djembe drums, with some metal objects, and with some, even just bits of gravel from the ground and rocks, they could make the most incredibly intense music, arguably more intense than anything that I could make, with synths and computers and sequencers and
Wah-wah pedals.
Not wah-wah pedal. Never been guilty of using a wah-wah pedal.
There's obviously the idea of world music too, which I guess you put into Starbucks and these versions.
I just have a problem with this term world music, because it's sort of, I kind of blame Peter Gabriel specifically for that. But it strikes me as incredibly condescending to sort of how there's our music, which is in the forefront of everything, and then everything else is world music, as if the world, the mainstream represents our music, and everything else is world. I mean, personally, I have problems generic terms in general, but at the very least, you know, it's a question of there's music, and it's all part of the same family. You know, and like, you know, in Hollywood film, you know, in the Oscars, I never understood why they had a foreign language award, because surely, you know, it was like the best film of the year, and then there's the best foreign language film of the year. You know, why are these two exclusive categories?
It's imperialism, I guess. It's like saying when maybe there's something more musical to me these days than someone banging a stick against a rock in the 1970s than there is about the new Killers album almost. But it's so much more about commerce and the managers and people getting paid and things like that. I've got interviewed before about
More integrity.
Integrity are good too.
I mean, certainly in terms of you know, I always question, you know, with any form of art, you know, where it's not specifically music, you know, or even in life in general, you know, I question the person's intent, you know, the reasons, what's really driving them to do something, you know, and you know, there's a pure artistic intent that seems to be present in a lot of that music that I found so inspiring. In other words, it's music being made for the sake of music, or being made for the sake of things which are considered greater than music. Whereas, again, you know, with the music that I'm more familiar with, there seemed to be a sort of impurity of intent in terms of people making music in order to maintain their illusion of identity as artists or as musicians, or as or to get laid, you know, or to be liked, or you know, because they're lonely, or because, you know, also, and there's nothing wrong intrinsically with those intents, but they seem to me, at least, less artistically pure.
I mean, with that in mind, what are you kind of thinking about when you set about composing a cut hand track? And then what do you want to get out of it?
I mean, I have a lot of dark places in my mind. You know, in terms of, you know, making sounds, that's really where it's coming from, and you know, and I really dedicate a lot of time to messing around and sort of the music isn't improvised in terms of the ultimate performance, but there's a lot of improvisation in terms of trying to discover types of sounds and things which, you know, I find compelling, and the dark is what attracts me most. I mean, it sounds like a contradiction, but the dark is what makes me happy. And happy music is what makes me depressed, you know, and it's the same with everything. I find depressing music, it lifts me up, you know, it gets, you know.
But at the same time, you're a big fan of Italo Disco, which is some of the happiest music.
Well, I actually question it. I think Italo Disco is remarkably melancholic. You know, if you analyse its chord structures, and we're getting sort of a bit musicological here. But they really very rarely use kind of major chord structures. I find it quite mournful, in fact, if you compared to, say, 80s UK dance music, which is genuinely upbeat.
Well, the saddest songs say so much usually.
William, you're playing later today, aren't you, as Curtains?
I believe so,
yeah. You just come for this?
No.
Okay.
I would have.
Does anybody want to ask William any questions, or me ask questions? William more? Anybody at all? So we're going to show the film after this, and he has to get off, so it's awkward doing a Q&A, isn't it? Especially in Birmingham.
Where are our studios?
William, what kind of, you've been playing some cat hand shows recently this year since Young came out. What kind of reactions have you been getting from the crowds? You played in Krakow recently, for example, and on Friday you played for people like that.
One thing you notice with music in general, especially with the kind of music that I specialise in, is how much the things like the architecture and the sort of the environment of the space affects people's behaviour. So it's not just this question of the sounds and the music or your performance, but the nature of the space. So, we played last night, we're losing track of time, Friday night in London in a sort of club setting, very claustrophobic, and it's absolutely packed with people. And then in Krakow we played in a classical music conservatory, which was also full, but it's entirely a seated arrangement. And I felt in both were successful in my mind, but they, the sort of the physiology of the space had a great effect upon people's responses.
And people were dancing a lot or screaming.
Yeah, well, so people were, in their, as we are here, we're all sort of trapped in our chairs in Krakow. So it's difficult for me to gauge what's going on, inside people's heads. Whereas in London, it was amazing to see people just going absolutely crazy.
And you also have some visuals, some footage that you showed when you performed. You'll be showing that tonight.
Yes.
Could you say a little about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of mix of visuals that I believe complement the music quite well. There's some Congolese text. There's some excerpts from Jean Rouch, who's a French documentarist made some amazing films like Le Maître Fou in the 1960s, and Dancing Girl. I mean, there's all kinds of things which I just personally felt complement the music quite well. And it's useful for me, as I said, because I do play in a lot of different types of venue. It's useful to have the visuals is a good foil for that.
I guess how does it, maybe people who want to know, how does it feel to be doing Whitehouse after, I guess we've done Whitehouse for so many years, and Whitehouse has been quiet for a while?
I mean, it's in one sense it's a very different type of experience. In another, there's a sort of, I think there's a natural progression from one to the other. Already incorporating that type of instrumentation in Whitehouse. So musically speaking, it's even some of the songs are the same, in fact. But in terms of performance, but it's very different. It's an entirely different type of thing. That said, I still, my intent in terms of people's responses is very much wanting to create this state of trance, as in TRANCE, formation, which, there's a lot of music out there. We were talking about this before, for films, for example. The music is all around us, everywhere we go. So I think, I see, if you're making music, I see, that one should aspire to make music that can do a little bit more than simply act as a sort of background to one's life. And when you're making a performance, it's important for me at least to design the experience. Whether it's successful or not is of course up open to question. But to design the experience so that there's the potential for some kind of transformation or and I hesitate to use these sort of quasi-religious lexis, enlightenment.
It's hard to find enlightenment.
Absolutely.
My favourite Whitehouse lyric, one of my favourite ones was always listen to the sound of being alive. I guess, what was that one? Just like a comment. Mummy and Daddy. So I was living in London at the time, and I would always get the tube to work, and that's what the tube would sound like. It would sound like that, just you going over the top of it. I was doing a lot of drugs at the time. And it was a transformative experience. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds crazy, but and a lot of people would disagree with it, I'm sure, and I take responsibility for people's responses. I get that people don't like it, they may not see it the way I see it, but to me, all of this music is uplifting, and that's just, as I say, I take that's just how I see it. I know personally a lot of people would also go along with that, but I also accept and take responsibility for the fact that that's probably not true for most people.
I think Whitehouse is probably easier for a lot of people to get into, like some Whitehouse, rather than Whitehouse, purely because maybe yourself and Philip aren't singing over the top of it.
Well, I mean, of course, how can I disagree?
I mean that in a complimentary way.
The effect ultimately, the design is the same in terms of the effect, but of course, any time that you use any kind of language, it narrows the sort of, it narrows your focus, and
When your fan base.
absolutely. But that's the price that you're paying for sort of making music like that. And once again, I take responsibility. I accept that that's the case. I accept that that the music I make, and I've never tried to or attempted to rationalise it to make it more palatable in that sense. Because I think if you do that, you're limiting the potential for people to experience it in their own way, as they see fit, as they choose to experience it. And it's a much more difficult, much more problematic position to take. But I think if when I listen to music or if I go and see a film, I don't want to have it rationalised for me in advance.
Everybody tells you what you should be feeling.
That's right.
What you should be thinking, being fucking preached to constantly. With a lot of things, it's getting worse, I think.
Yeah.
We have the Steve Jobs vision of everybody's free to do what you want to do. This computer's been designed for you, but it's also just, it's an absolute racket. You're being told what to think more than anything before anything. Well, not without sounding like a hippie. I think you're getting messages more through, what's the word? Terrible Hollywood sludgy, what's the word? Sludge, just terrible mainstream things telling you more like dangerous messages than even definitely things like this.
Well, one of the things is that nowadays we're addicted through the demand to sell product. We're addicted to rationalising things through interviews, through feature for articles, through promotion, whatever, and we're addicted to finding out about. It's totally understandable. I'm the same as anybody else. If there's something I like, I want to find out about the person that made it and the things that what they were thinking, what their reasons for doing it are. But if you take art, if you take a sort of Caravaggio painting, for example, there was never, nobody's going to interview Caravaggio, because there was never any opportunity to find out what he was thinking, what his processes were. And I think it's much better for that. I think it retains its enigma and its mystery, and I mean that, in the best possible sense.
The mystery's gone from a lot of things, I think. There's hardly ever any open-ended question at the end of anything. There's never, what would happen next? There's always, in movies especially, there's always like, there's going to be a fucking sequel, because the guys come back at the end. Usually there's not hardly ever any open-ended things.
The problem is simply with of all the WH questions, the why question is the problematic one, because for every why question there's another why question. If I ask you, if you want a vanilla ice cream or a chocolate ice cream, which one would you like? Which one would you like? And you say, I'll take the vanilla ice cream. I say, why do you want the vanilla ice cream? You say, because I prefer vanilla. I don't like chocolate. And I say, well, why don't you like chocolate? And then you're going into sort of biological territory, for your own taste buds and so forth. And then, well, why is your biology like that? And one why question leads to another. And ultimately, that one of the things I admire about children is they don't get bogged down in these why questions. They're quite happy to sort of just use the term sort of so little Jimmy. Why do you prefer the chocolate ice cream? Because. There's no need that they don't feel any need to justify it or rationalise it in any kind of way, and I feel the same way about art and literature and films and so forth. I think it is what it is, and what is, and what isn't. That's the magic and the mystery.
I just wonder if that ever becomes unsettling. Like I can accept that idea that you do it because for what you want to do and for the reasons you want to do things. Does there ever come a point where the kind of disconnect between what the audience might be making of it and what you think is going on becomes so great that becomes unnerving in a way, or not?
Unnerving to myself?
Yeah, or not. I mean, that's not a leading question. It's just a matter of interest.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, as I said, but already said, I think you're opening yourself up to all sorts of misinterpretation and sort of difficult situations. There's no doubt about it. That's the price you pay for in the modern age, of course, because now that's you're expected to explain yourself. You expect, and that's not exclusive to music or the kind of music that I make. I mean, we're all, from when we're expected to explain ourselves to our parents. We're expected to explain ourselves to all sorts of authority figures like teachers, to the police, and to
people wearing those fluorescent jackets.
Yeah, yellow reflectors, but it's true, we're sort of conditioned to justify all sorts of actions. If you compare it to sort of, I always think you can learn a lot from animals, and if you compare it to a cat never has to justify its catness, if you know what I mean. And I admire that. A cat is a cat, regardless of its context, whether it's living outdoors, whether it's a wild cat or a domestic cat. It's still very much a cat. In other words, it is a cat. What is it's not a dog. It's a cat. Whereas human beings have all sorts of issues about its human beingness, if we can call it that. And if we narrow it down to so whatever your name happens to be, if your name is Deborah, that people have a problem with, she has a problem with her Deborah-ness. If that makes sense.
Question over there.
Just thinking about the sort of, like the child, the cat, it's like their innocence. You know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of pre-questions of what ought to be or what might be and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, as soon as you get past your animal nature and your child nature and all that sort of stuff, you have to deal with those kind of things. So it's like, when you come back and say, I like or I don't like, it's fine that your innocent self likes and doesn't like, but in a bigger kind of context of how things ought to be or how things might be and all that kind of stuff, like it's a social kind of thing, like me, so it exists in a bigger social sphere, kind of thing.
I question this notion of innocence because innocence implies that there's a guilt, that if we see this as a kind of duality, and I question this duality. I question whether children are as innocent as we like to think, as us adults like to think, and I also question whether adults are as guilty as that implies. But once again, I think what is that whether we're children or adults, we're still human beings. I don't see I don't see any reason to transcend that position.
Just going back to what you were saying before, do you think in our culture lately we're more ill-equipped to deal with uncertainty than previously? Because of the messages that we have to know why someone says something and what it's all about?
What I think that, you're referring, like the Toffler or future shock aspect of it is are we ill-equipped? I think we are. I kind of see it rather than using that term. I see it the other way around. That the rationale, these types of things are actually they're impeding us from our own ability to express ourselves well. So what we lose from rationalization, if I can answer your question kind of laterally, is we lose our self-expression. We lose our aliveness.
I was just thinking, you talk about sort of notions of innocence. Isn't there not like a level of absolvement of responsibility that you talk about here in a lot of cases? This thing of just being yourself, being the person that you are in the situation, and kind of finding a level of humanness. Does that not absolve you from the responsibility of interacting with people, doing the right thing? Do you know what I mean? Where does that come from?
I take responsibility for everything that I do and every effect that it has, you know, and you can't really go beyond that point. You know, if I am not blaming anybody for, you know, if somebody doesn't like what I do, you know, then I'll take responsibility for that, you know. If somebody burgles my house, I'll take responsibility for that. I had some expensive shit, I don't have it anymore. I take responsibility for that.
It's self-policing. We're not walking around the streets attacking people. You have to self-police occasionally, all the time, I think.
That was guys. Go on, you go.
Perhaps this is an oversimplification of an oversimplified view. Would you say this is a purely Western view that there needs to be an intrinsic rationalisation and meaning in everything, or would you say it's true in a lot of other cultures as well?
I'm not qualified to answer. You know, I don't want to. One thing I should make clear is that, you know, I say in all you know, I have a lot of theories about things, and I have all sorts of preposterous, outrageous ideas about things, none of which you should believe. I'm really not interested in the truth per se. And the reason I say that is to remove the burden for you to have to disagree or agree with me. So I don't have any, you know, I don't really have any opinions or beliefs. To me, in general, belief in general, beliefs about things is like a disease, and you know, and I try and, you know, on a personal level, try to sort of not get too attached to my beliefs about things, because I'm aware that my beliefs, along with everybody else's, is just my own bullshit. So please don't believe any of my bullshit.
You, this guy, and then this guy.
Do you feel as though you've been critically rehabilitated in the past sort of 5 years or so? For a long time you were basically persona non grata as an artist, and then sort of in the past couple of years with the last 2 or 3 Whitehouse albums and suddenly Cut Hands, do you feel as though artistically you've been vindicated, that your view, or non-view as such, you've stuck to your guns throughout, and that basically the critics have come around to your way of thinking? Or how do you basically view what's happened to you as an artist in the past, say, 3 or 4 years?
I think when you grow up, so disenfranchised, you know, that from mainstream, and you know, and a lot of that that happens by accident rather than by design, that you don't really notice any different from one place to another. It's just, as I say, what is. I accept what I get, whether it's, you know, I get that you think that I was persona non grata, but as far as I'm concerned, I get what I get. It's from one day to the next. I accept it.
It depends what world you live in.
Yeah.
True.
Well, something like The Wire, yeah. The Wire, for example. The Wire, I don't think particularly were very favourable about your work.
Well, you know, I don't judge. You know, it doesn't affect. You know, from. No, I haven't got a problem with it. You know, I like the one. But
He likes it.
I know what I say.
why would I? No, it's just that I don't think I could be accused of sort of making things, you know, or doing things in order to appease certain, you know, constituents, you know, that whether it was, you know, 10 years, 20 years ago, or now, in fact, I don't think that's ever been the case, you know. And as I say, I accept what I get.
But why do you think the critics have come around to liking what you now say when they didn't?
Why? Because.
In the sense that you've always had something of a political message in your music and what you do, even if it's just on an awareness level, within the theory of art, would it matter to you if everyone just didn't kind of go past your music and look to why you do African rhythms and where you kind of taken your influence from? Would it
Did you say political?
To a degree. Even if it's not intended.
See, I don't remember, don't believe a word I say. That to me, political represents groups of people as opposed to the personal. So if we can see sort of the duality of political and personal, that everything I do is entirely personal. It's me. That's why, you know, it's not African music. It's my music. You know, and you know, I use African instruments for sure, but it's not anybody. You know, I take responsibility for my own music. It's personal, and beyond that, I really don't really have much to say. You know, that as a consumer, I prefer art that's you know, whether it's filmmaking or literature and so forth, that's personalised, that's revealing, that's in other words, it's the writer or the artist exercising as much self-expression as possible. That's what I value the most, and to me that's antithetical to the political, if you can call it that.
Last one.
Okay, yeah, it's just more of a direct question to you, really, about the compositional process, I guess, about moving from Whitehouse into Cut Hands. Was it like a deliberate aesthetical choice to juxtapose the kind of power electronic aesthetic against the Afro-tribal instrumentation that you use? Because for me, as an experiential member of an audience, it is quite an exciting gap to be bridged, actually.
I don't. Again, I have a problem with this term tribal music, because it sounds like an offshoot of the world music. You know, it's music. The intent to me may match a lot. You know, the intensity may match the same. You know, what initially inspired me about, for example, voodoo music is the effect upon people, and you know, that you know, people would be going into these extreme trance-altered states, and I was lucky to get the opportunity at a big club in Glasgow to test this out with you know, genuine African percussion music and voodoo music, and you know, in front of about 500 people at industrial strength volume, and it was pretty much the same. You know, we're talking about lots of party sort of, you know, teenagers, 19, 20-year-olds, responding in very, very similar ways. You know, as I keep saying this, they were virtually frothing at the mouth in that context. It was amazing to see, and that was extremely inspiring. And that was kind of the moment when I think this is the direction I really want to take this stuff. I actually think the electronic part complements the percussion extremely well. The two things go very well together.
One more question. And that's it.
What's your album of the year,
Album of the year.
Album of the year.
What's your album of the year?
What, this year?
Yeah.
I really don't have an opinion about that. I mean,
Okay, to end on that amazing last question, always end it on the last good question, which says thank you anyway. Coming up now is the Bicycle Iberia. William Bennett did the soundtrack to it. His mind co-produced it in a way. Hope you enjoy it. It's fun. Thank you very much for coming.